Hello and welcome to the Amber Stitt Show. I am your host, Amber Stitt, and today we welcome one of my sisters from Phoenix, one of my WIFS sisters, Heidi Thompson. Welcome to the show, Heidi.
Oh, thank you so much for having me here.
So I've been dreaming about this episode since our tea party. Did you know that? I've been thinking about all these things that Heidi knows. I just want people to know more about what you do and your expertise. So I am really fortunate to have you here today.
Well, we just had such a great conversation, and I just know this is going to be super valuable content for people. So excellent.
Well, and I don't want to say this wrong, but you're the founder of Lifeguarding Legacies. Is that the correct name of the company? You're a legacy lifeguard, right?
Yes, that's correct. You got that perfect. So yes, Lifeguarding Legacies, because the goal is to actively do this with people and to serve more than one client. So Lifeguarding Legacies. I'm the legacy lifeguard. To my knowledge, I think I was the first attorney in the U.S. to decide to pull in the lifeguard, all the symbolism and all the fun that goes along with my obsession with the beach.
Oh, the obsession. I see. So, well, I think before we dive into some of the meatier topics, I think it's kind of fun to go back and say, you have something you say about where you've been. You've landed in Arizona. So if you're talking about the beach, there's no beach here. So what inspired you to land here?
Well, I do. I introduce myself as a washing floor Virgitex Calzonian because I have lived all over the country. Our family just took turns on who got to live different places. We moved to Florida when we were early married and our kids were just 2 and 3, so that my husband could work for the Mouse. And we were there 6 years. And then we left there so I could go to law school in Virginia. And then we planned to go back to Florida, but the economy kind of tanked 2007-8. So I ended up in Houston. I ended up going back into education and stayed another decade in education, even though I had the law degree and passed the Florida bar.
Oh my goodness.
And so, California called for my son so that he could go do a little Hollywood career. Moved back to Washington after his Hollywood career to go be near my family. And then a job opportunity for my husband led us back here to Arizona. And while it's not the beach, it's still a wonderful place. And I still love the sunshine, and it can't get hot enough for me. So it's...
Oh, good. Yeah. We share that. I'm always chilly.
Yeah. Nothing where you have to shovel.
Right. So I know we have listeners everywhere. So yes, we will just admit we don't do well with the snow, but that's okay. There's just to each its own. But what fascinated me about your practice is that back before I was in this business over 10 years now, I was a paralegal working for attorneys, and I loved estate planning and business entities and different of the more of the corporate, not litigation side of things, the business world. And the way you've built your practice to be able to just make it so simple, you were telling me, and I can see it on your website too, so I'll link up ways that people can find you. But I feel like you must have had a calling to figure out, how do we streamline this to make it easy for people? Because you say things like, I bring the documents to the people, and it's really making it so seamless, I think, is what you do. So can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's important for people to know, to take that overwhelm away from this topic.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you, I don't claim to have many superpowers. I certainly don't have a sense of direction. Thank God for Waze, because I get lost, northeast, what is that? Turn right past the Chick-fil-A. That makes far more sense to me. But anyway, what I do have as a superpower is I have the ability to take really complex things and make them super simple. I can take any complex idea that I understand and reduce it down to something a 6th grader can understand. I basically feel like I've done that both with my book and with my practice for people. Mm-hmm. So I come to people's homes. We sit at their dining room table. I ask them about 50 questions. And from that, we come up with a great estate plan that fits their needs. And it's very custom. It's very special. Mm-hmm. It always feels like the clients hug me because it doesn't feel like a lawyer. It feels like, we went deep. Yeah. And I had that when I was in education. I was mostly a counselor. I had a master's in education and counseling. And so I feel like I use that degree an awful lot when I'm working with clients as well.
Yeah, I think that's a neat testimony too, also, that you can blend in different things that whatever you're talented in, and create something there. I think that even in my business with insurance planning, I know that people tend to do a lot of nothing. If they're worried about thinking some of these negative thoughts while we're in planning, being proactive can also make people feel like, gosh, if I think about these awful things, they might happen. But we're really taking a proactive approach, but it can be so overwhelming. So if you can simplify the process, I mean, that's really what stood out to me when I met you, that people need this. The other, almost like a myth that we could probably bust, I think you would agree that a lot of people assume with estate planning in their head, there's this big house with this huge green lawn, and it's just, we're worth so much money. And it's an interesting word, and maybe it's from, before our time. But can you speak to that a little bit about how even the younger generations might benefit from some of the work that you do?
Sure. Well, first I'll just kind of do the tongue-in-cheek thing that sounds salesy, but it's so true. It's just so true. You may not think you have an estate, but you have an estate plan. It's the state's plan. Mm-hmm. If you don't trust the state to manage your affairs for you, then you need to have a legacy lifeguard. So that's the salesy little phrasing on it. But the truth of it, I mean, there's just so much truth in there. There are statutes that will control where your stuff goes and who it goes to if you don't have a plan saying where you want it to go. And it's not just your stuff. It's also your medical decision making. It's also who your kids go to. It's also who your furry babies go to. There's all kinds of tax implications for, what way you deal with your house in your estate. Like there's so many little pieces to it that you think the idea that you could possibly go on Google and figure it out yourself. I just wouldn't recommend it. There's a lot to this process. And yet, if you have someone like me that can walk you through it, it becomes super simple for you.
Yeah. Well, and you had talked about taking things and breaking them down into a process. And so making it more something that we can comprehend. There is a big topic lately that I know that you've been studying, and we have a lot of affiliates or other people in different communities or organizations that I know that you and I are involved with that have been working hard to close up this Secure 2.0. However, there are some things that you and I had talked about that I think are very important. And so if we're just relying on, congrats, the Secure 2.0 has been established, you're saying, well, hold on now, we need to talk because there's more to that story outside of that high level, what we're hearing about. And so I think that you're probably perfect for the job to break this down for the audience so that they can really understand how this can affect them. And then further, we might need to do some adjustments to planning. And so I'm going to hand off a kind of a big topic your way, but I feel like you're good for the job. So in general, should we just define what Secure 2.0 has done?
That's exactly where I was going to go. So during the Trump impeachment hearings, when that was all over the press, there was this was December 2019, a very important piece of legislation called the Secure Act. And what it said it was going to do is make it easier for businesses to offer retirement planning to their employees. And it did have those provisions in it. But what it really was a very sneaky tax grab. And it was Congress realized that people had IRAs that they just rolled them down for generations. We're on about generation 4 of these things. And you could inherit someone's IRA, roll it into yours, and pay tiny amounts of tax throughout your lifetime as you withdraw them during retirement. And then you could, when you die, the rest of it just goes into your kids and they do the same thing. And then it goes to their kids and it does the same thing. And Congress was never getting the tax promise that they had when they created these. So what they came up with was something really sneaky. And what they've done is you can still roll your IRA to a spouse, but if you have someone 11 years younger than you, which think about your kids, they're always going to be 11 years younger than you. That's why they pick that number. They're no longer going to be able to roll this in. Instead, what they're going to get is they're going to get a 10-year distribution from the date of your death, where it's distributed to them fully and taxed at their receiving tax rate. So you think about the 80-year-old that dies, their kid is 55 in their 10-year highest tax earning years of their life when they're taking this distribution. The worst possible timing to inherit this amount of money that they can't roll out and pay later. It was a brilliant tax grab. But what that did is it made IRAs now still a decent vehicle for your own retirement, but a terrible vehicle now for inheritance.
Okay, so let's pause there. And I think a lot of people can nod their head to the IRA. Let's define IRA. And are we talking about qualified and then one outside of work? So let's do a little vocab, kind of like a quick, because I want our audience to know what that might mean, because is this is not in the 401k world, it's traditionally the IRA.
It's 401k as well.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
So it's anything where you didn't pay taxes when you put it in.
Okay.
Okay. So if you didn't pay taxes when you put it in, then that means later on when you take it out, you pay taxes. And it was designed, I mean, the goal around IRAs and the bill of goods that I was sold is that if you invest, your whole life, then when you retire, you'll only pay a small amount of retirement taxes. And so this is a great vehicle, save money now, save money later.
Mm-hmm.
But really what they've done by changing the rules on us in 2019 is we always thought, well, what we don't use, it goes to our kids. It's a great inheritance thing, and it's not anymore. And so this is true for 401ks and IRAs. Now, also for Roths. Now, Roths, you remember, those are a different special kind of IRA that you can only do so much a year and only if you qualify. Mm-hmm. And it always grows tax-free, and that's still true. And it'll still be tax-free to your kids, but they're going to receive it still over that 10-year period when they don't necessarily need it. It's not something now that they can hold on to for whenever they need it. So really, it just screwed up all of our retirement-based investing is what it did. It messed with the distribution on that. It messed with the taxation on that.
I think the wrapper, the way that this was almost advertised was, hey, look, we're letting you leave your money in there longer. Thank you. You're welcome kind of a attitude. I mean, those are the things I would hear from a high level between some of the organizations that were posting bulletins about, the progress that we have been making. But it's almost like, I think the thing that you and I were resonating with is the lack of control that we're seeing and just believing that putting all this money in and saving on taxes today is so beneficial. And I'm 43 now, and I've been in the business for over 10 years. And there is this kind of this preconceived, like something we grow up hearing about, always just put the money in the accounts and get the match and free money from your employer. But what is it to what end and what is it costing us? And I feel like from a legal perspective, that's really where you're going, we need to watch out for this. I mean, would you agree with that?
I would agree with that. I would 100% agree with that. So really, if you have most of your savings in your house and your retirement, your IRA type account, that could be a 401k or a traditional IRA, but anything where you didn't pay taxes going in and will pay taxes coming out, you've now made that a very difficult thing to leave your kids. So now people are kind of waking up to that and realizing that there are just better alternatives that are better inheritance vehicles. And I mean, number one on that list, I mean, just unarguably is always going to be life insurance. Investing. And there's just so many things you can do in there that can become tax-free to your kids. You can borrow against them. Some of them have life benefits and things that can take care of you. There's just so many wonderful things you can do with life insurance that your IRA can't do, that it's not the same when you start thinking about inheritance. And it's not that IRAs are suddenly bad, but it's just they're now suddenly bad for inheritance.
Sure. So as you're building out, like what you said, legacy. So when you think of legacy and what you want to leave behind for your family, we're in an environment, we're seeing inflation, we talk about taxes, but historically speaking, I mean, I cannot see that taxes could go down. So we really have to be mindful about all the pre-tax deposits we're making and losing out on some of the opportunity costs just in general. So that's just life for us today, having opportunities. But then again, the legacy piece is just what's going to show up for our family after we've worked so hard to get there. So it's become very interesting. So are you discovering through the estate planning process that we have to start updating beneficiaries and talk about other solutions now? I mean, is it almost like you have to enhance and amend maybe the initial plan? Are you seeing that with your clients?
Well, another thing to keep in mind, because of the 10-year distribution cycle now on the IRAs, they're going to go out in those 10 years. They're going to be taxed to your kids over those 10 years. You don't have the same level of control that you once had on the distribution for your IRAs. So it used to be you could do all kinds of creative provisions over time, knowing that they could just roll it into their own IRAs and it was easy. It changed the planning substantially. It made my job a lot more difficult for people who are IRA heavy because the tax consequences of putting it in the trust are even worse than the tax consequences of putting it out. So now you're pretty much limited to that 10-year distribution plan that the government came up with instead of a distribution plan you would have had. Whereas if your money was in life insurance, for example, you could do a distribution plan over time where you're doing all kinds of creative things for your kids. You can, do small amounts every month, every quarter, every year. You could do, different bites at the apple where they get large amounts several different years. There's just so many options you have that you no longer have if your primary investing was in an IRA.
Yeah, we cannot predict. There's other things that are in our future that there could be some of the history that pops back up, but then there's new things that can occur with just life events and technology. So that's really interesting. We cannot truly predict what might happen. So the life insurance piece, of course, I'm a little biased, but that certainly can help build in those provisions there. So is there anything right now that you think we should still discuss on Secure 2.0?
Sure. So I'm not a financial advisor, so I shouldn't be going too deeply into what you should do with your money. I'm more about what looks good for inheritance, what makes sense for inheritance. Mm-hmm. But it's definitely a good idea to speak to the people you trust. If you do have heavy IRAs, talk to your financial advisor about the possibility of maybe backdoor Rothing some of it, maybe moving some of it over to insurance products. If you've got more than what you need for your own retirement sitting in IRAs, and you're looking at it as inheritance, it may be time to look at converting something.
Okay. So legal disclosures, we're always good about saying that, right? Like, I'm not a tax advisor, you're an attorney. So it sounds like to me, in my world, a lot of the clients that I meet are doing their own financial boot camps and reading books on proficiency, financial competency. But a lot of us, that is not our day job. So unless you love finance, it sounds like now, even more than ever, we need to have our advisory panel, truly our legal advisors. And then we need to make sure that our, let's say, accountants, CPAs, enrolled agents are very proficient in tax law. Because of everything that you just said, they're also, if you're getting close to retirement, somebody that's understanding these distributions, Social Security, and all of those things blended together. I don't know if this is something we can really do on our own anymore. So, and Heidi, a lot of my medical professionals are reading books and trying to do a lot of this on their own. And some people can and are capable of that. But if you're really, that is not your finance background and that's not your thing, I think you really do need to bring in a trusted network. And I know that you and I can both provide resources as needed. But when I think about the Pathways of Peak Performance audience, and I try to blend in ways to fit the 5 steps that are on the YouTube channel and the podcast, it's focusing on talents. And if you're not talented with the financial competency because your talents lie somewhere else, we certainly need to bring in a trusted alliance. Focusing on money goals, we have to figure out what's important to the family, but then the risk management piece can sound very stuffy, but we really need to transfer risk. And with what you are saying about the Secure 2.0 being present, we really got to look at things now and really be careful there. But there are some strategies, like you said, with planners or other advisors to start transitioning funds to make them more tax appropriate, especially for yourself today and then for the beneficiaries, right? So any takeaways that you could give the audience if you're really looking at things now, and this is not something that will sunset, correct? So this is the new way of living, right?
It doesn't look like it's going away anytime. I mean, there's just no talk about it going away. Congress, frankly, it needs the money and it's missed 4 generations of generational transfer of wealth, and it's not going to miss another one. And this is the way they worked around that. So if you inherited anything after December of 2019 and it was someone 11 years older than you, you're getting taxed at your tax bracket on that inheritance. And before that, you weren't. Before that, you just rolled it into your own IRA. So that's the takeaway, is recognize who's receiving your IRAs. If you do have heavy investments there, who's receiving them? Maybe that's the part, if you're charitably minded, maybe that's the part you send to charity, or maybe you talk to your advisor about doing some conversions.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
It's just, there's a lot of possibilities, and I don't think a person could figure it all out on their own. I think they're going to need to have some trusted people like you in their life, like a good advisor. And on the estate side, someone that's an attorney that knows what they're doing in this. You know, there are plenty of people who can do a will that you can find online for cheap, but they're not going to be able to have these conversations about what happens with the different assets and how they're going to distribute out.
We haven't even talked about, I mean, I know this doesn't always play into community property, the way the states run things, but I have to say, I didn't even go online. I actually had a tax advisor give me somebody out of my state of Arizona to help me with my initial plan. And I've told you, though, that I had to actually go through it again with local representation before I met you and found loopholes. I mean, these weren't really awful things that were not done correctly, but gosh, silly things that once we looked at everything and filed them correctly for the state of Arizona, I just felt so much better. And there's just this feeling when you take action and literally put all this in motion. It feels so good to walk away from it. It's not always fun while you're in it, but man, it feels so good when you actually get this all said and done.
That's what I feel like I sell is actually, and you too, you honestly, you sell the same thing. What I really sell is a healthy night's sleep.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the not worrying at night about what's going to happen if, because that's in a binder on the shelf and has been taken care of.
Oh, absolutely. So to me, that was really where the podcast and some other things popped up after just doing the insurance planning was, how do we take the stress out of our lives? Well, we have to have some accountability and we have to work through our system and our process. But gosh, once it's done, you might need to do some tweaking along the way, but it feels pretty amazing. So as life can throw you curveballs, it's really about having the resilience when these steps are done. You really can overcome a lot because life can be hard, and that's okay as long as we have the steps and our teams in place. So anybody that's listening that does have a question, I know that I'll give them your information, but also you have a book that's available to people. So if anything, you're not really sure where to start, they could start there, correct?
That's correct. It will break down everything. It's written for Arizona. Having said that, probably 80% of the content would be good anywhere except when I'm talking about numbers in Arizona.
Sure.
It breaks down what I think, just like I said, my superpower, everything into what I call 6th grade blog speak. Lots of easy stories, very digestible language. It gives very specific examples, and it will make you understand what you need to do with your estate plan. You won't be able to do it yourself,
right?
But you'll understand what needs to happen in it and be very clear about what it is you're looking for.
Your book is linked below in the description box. And so that's an easy click. And then there's a downloadable version. So if anything, that can tee up questions. And I always say, look at things and audit, build a little list, because that's where if you're not sure about how to answer some of these questions when you're reading through this, then you certainly do need to be walking through it with an expert. So I appreciate you breaking that down, because I feel like you're giving people more of that honest behind the scenes look at some of this, and we have to be cautious and really pay attention and not just hide from the fact that there's a change. Let's do something about it while we feel good and we're able to. So,
exactly.
So I really appreciate you being here on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a great conversation. I knew it would be.
All right. Until next time, Heidi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of The Amber Stitt Show. For more information about the podcast, books, articles, and more, please visit me at amberstitt.com. Until next week, enjoy your journey at home and at work. Thank you for listening.